Good morning to the board, staff, students, family, friends, and visitors of Kaskaskia College. I am honored to be here today. KC is my home. This is where my career started as a student. Often I have referred to myself as a KC kid. This is a place whereas I had the honor of learning from great mentors such as Dr. Dorothy Pecky, Dale Bassett, Bonnie Sanders, Willie Harris, and Dr. James Underwood, and many others. Before I begin my message today, just a brief word of wisdom to the young people in our audience, since I'm talking about being at home. Life will take you on a journey quite similar to Dorothy's journey in The Wizard of Oz. You'll never know who you will meet, and you surely will be surprised by some of the things that you discover along the way. Now, you may not click your heels 3 times to return home, but I guarantee you, as you journey through life, you will discover there is truth in the meaning. There is no place like home. Again, KC, it is an honor to be home once again, and I thank you for the invitation. Upon being invited to speak at today's event, I contemplated what would be the focus of my message. Often the I have the dream speech is solely used by commentators and public speakers to highlight Dr. King's mission and vision for equality and justice and where we are today in reference to his vision. Today, I want to reflect on Dr. King's final speech, I've been to the mountaintop. A speech I believe profoundly exemplifies his character and his thoughts about his own impact upon social justice through the civil rights movement. After reading and analyzing Dr. King's I've Been to the Mountaintop speech, it is my belief that the speech was actually a farewell speech and a message to the people to prepare for the aftermath of his mission. The I've Been to the Mountaintop speech was delivered in Memphis, Tennessee on April 3rd, 1968, almost 5 years after his I Have a Dream speech, and only 1 day before his assassination at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis on April the 4th. During this speech, Dr. King talked about if he was able to have a conversation with God at the beginning of time, and God asked him which age of time he would like to live in, he would not have just one response to God's question. Instead, he would request a journey through the chronological history of man, starting with God's children crossing the Red Sea, leaving the wilderness, and entering what is written in the Bible as the Promised Land. Dr. King went on to share with his audience that he would have also expressed an interest to be present at the table with great philosophers such as Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates as they discussed the eternal issues of reality. He also wanted to visit the period of the Roman Empire and the Renaissance, which shaped modern-day art, politics, and literature. It was obvious in reading this speech that Dr. King admired this journey called life and the very facets of our history that has shaped our world up until the 60s. Within the speech, Dr. King continued to talk about the hypothetical question from God, and of course told the audience that he would have enjoyed journeying to the time of Martin Luther, a German professor of theology, who had denounced some of the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church, and whom his father, Martin Sr., had renamed himself and Dr. King after. Now let me briefly explain for those of you who may not be aware. Dr. Martin Luther King was born Michael King Jr. His father, Michael Sr., took a trip to Germany and was introduced to the teachings of Martin Luther. He was so inspired by these teachings that upon his return to the States, he renamed himself Martin Luther Sr., and his son, who was 5 at the time, Martin Luther Jr. To most, it may have appeared to merely be a change in the name for Michael Jr. It was not. For his father, it defined who he was and the expectation of who Martin Luther Jr. would become. Dr. King begins to summarize this portion of his speech by conveying to the audience his final interest would be to journey to the early 30s, when the nation faced bankruptcy and President Franklin D. Roosevelt cried out to the people, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." Lastly, he states, and I quote directly from his speech, "Strangely enough, I return to the Almighty and say, if you allow me just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy." The audience begins to applaud because at that time, he was actually living in the 20th century. Indirectly, what Dr. King was conveying to the people was, I am here, and this is where I desire to be. The world was in a period of distress when Dr. King delivered this message. The 60s was a time of not only the civil rights protests, but also the Vietnam War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the unfortunate assassination of President Kennedy. People had reached a low, a place of uncertainty, a place of questioning what was right and what was wrong. Survival was being sung out the mouths, and ringing in the ears of those who were concerned as to what direction was our nation headed. Sound familiar? Dr. King spoke of this dilemma among men and women of our nation as he shared his point of view that he felt that people must meet a low before they can rise up and become part of the solution rather than remain part of the problem. Of course, at that time, his strategy involved assuring that our governmental system upheld and enforced the First Amendment for all people rather than some, and to protest violations of the law through nonviolent activities. Dr. King was dedicated to establishing a new normalcy called change in America. A mission that would surrender some victories, but some grief as well, as the nation adjusted to accepting its new normalcy. Personally, I have a sense of understanding as to how Dr. King may have felt during his quest to establish this new normalcy called change, as I compare his battle to my own battle of being victorious in overcoming cancer. Let me explain. There are 5 stages to grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Hope, H-O-P-E, serves as an umbrella to these stages. You lose the umbrella, you lose the battle. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I experienced each of these stages prior to my treatment. When I was declared cancer-free, yes, I had won the battle, but no one shared with me that I would not be returning to my former state of normalcy. No one told me I would have a new normal with a surname called Change that carried a warning sticker that read, "This journey may produce side effects related to grief before you reach your final destination called change." Again, a victory, but some grief as well as I adjusted to my new normalcy. In the eyes of many, and today, Dr. King was a visionary with a sound purpose. But unfortunately, in the late 50s and 60s, to some, Dr. King was viewed as a troublemaker and a communist. Among some African Americans, Dr. King was a hypocritical preacher. During the I've Been to the Mountaintop speech, Dr. King tells the story of being at a book signing in 1958 for his first book and being stabbed in the chest by an African American female. The story was one in which members of his audience were already familiar with, for it had made headline news because, according to the doctors that had treated him for his injury, the tip of the blade lay near his aorta. And if he had sneezed, the blade would have punctured the aorta and he would have likely drowned in his own blood. Dr. King goes on to share with his audience that even though he had received well wishes from many, including members of the government, his favorite one was from a girl who explained that she was Caucasian and she was simply writing him to let him know that she was so happy that he did not sneeze. I must say, I too am happy that Dr. King did not sneeze. For if he had sneezed, I wonder if I would be standing before you today. The Civil Rights Movement began in 1954, but America was lashing back at its new normalcy. President Eisenhower had signed the Civil Rights Act in 1957 in reference to voting rights, but it was not until 1964 that a new Civil Rights Act was signed that outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. If Dr. King had died in 1958, I wonder who or if anyone would have picked up the torch and continued his mission of obtaining justice and equality for all men through acts of nonviolence. Reason being, by this time, Dr. King had already begun to receive threats against his life, and his house had been bombed with his wife and children at home. Thankfully, they were not injured. Today, some of you in the audience are probably old enough to remember the years of the Civil Rights Movement. Whether you're old enough or not to remember those days, I ask each of you this hypothetical question. Would you have stood in line as one to carry the torch of Dr. King if he had died in 1958? In reading this speech, as I got closer to the conclusion, it was hard to fight back to the tears because I believe Dr. King had actually received a premonition from God that his death on earth was near. Again, I believe that I've been to the mountaintop speech was an actual attempt to prepare the people to move forward without him. During his conclusion of the speech, he informs the audience of the difficult days ahead, but he also tells them that it did not really matter to him because he had been to the mountaintop. He had saw the promised land. And although he would like to live a long time, longevity has its place. He made the people aware that his only desire was to do God's will. The actual video footage from this speech shows Dr. King literally falling back into the pulpit seating as he concludes his speech by saying, "I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." Dr. King was on a mission from God to speak change with hope, not fear, to a group of people who were being mistreated by a nation that they had vowed to honor. to remain destiny-driven, to bring forth this change by ignoring negativity and remaining focused to its cause. To understand the difference between purpose versus fame or being a people pleaser. A seed of greatness had been planted in Dr. King. It had taken root and it had to flourish. Dr. King had an understanding that his mission was not about him, but it was to fulfill the desires of God, his creator, who had given him purpose. Dr. King knew that with each victory, because it demanded change, the change would carry a warning sticker about the stages of grief. The toughest job of each battle was to hold on to the umbrella of hope, H-O-P-E. Consequently, Dr. King didn't mind getting slapped, beaten, or thrown to jail because he knew the cause was greater than his sense of pride. He found dignity in fighting for the rights of others. He discovered that his true character could only come forth when he found himself busy focusing on the positive solutions to develop a nation of equality for all men and women. Dr. King knew he had to be willing to stir the pot called life, even though the spoon called freedom was broken. Death had knocked often at his door. But Dr. King didn't have any problem answering the knock by telling death, "Death, don't bother me. I'm too busy right now. I'm about my Father's business. I'll see you later." Dr. King left us with a dream that still has substance, a dream that reminds us at the beginning of each year we still have some work to do. Today, we may not agree with our nation's leadership, but the job of making our nation a better place was never intended and based on the works of one man or woman. The works requires a unity of men and women of all creeds, color, religion, etc. The works requires becoming part of the solution rather than remaining part of the problem. We must accept the pain of our past, but we cannot dwell there. Stinky thinking eventually seeps to our feet and becomes concrete that limits our mobility and peripheral vision to see the opportunities that may be within our reach or our future. Yes, we all will bear personal trials and tribulations, but we must recognize that when they come to make us stronger. Therefore, we must embrace them and learn from them. Each of us has something that we can contribute to the betterment of our nation, whether it's simply being a law-abiding citizen, or becoming an actual advocate for change in your community. To our elders, pull out your toolbox called wisdom. The younger generation needs to hear your testimonies of how you made it through tough times. To the younger generation, lend your ear to those who are wise in their walk and their talk. Don't allow fear to hinder you. Soar, S-O-A-R, rather than survive. Become a faith walker rather than a fear factor. Walk until you find a door of opportunity. Once you reach it, enter in with your own personal toolbox that should contain integrity, wisdom, strength, determination, and endurance. Discard tools such as disrespect, self-doubt, and foolishness. They will hinder your journey in this walk called life. As a group of people, we cannot respond to ignorance with ignorance. We must set and accept a value system built on equality and justice for all. Race, religion, and social status should not be factors that determine how we will treat our fellow man. Whether you believe in Christianity or not, there is an excellent Christian principle that I believe we all should strive to follow, and it is, thou should love thy neighbor as thou love thyself. Of course, this principle may present a question in itself to some. Do you love yourself? If you're asking yourself this question, I ask of you, have you become so obsessed with competitiveness and social status that you have lost sense of the fact that you are of substance and value simply because you exist? Have you become a slave to the ills of this society? There is new territory out there that awaits us. How will we respond? Let's declare that we will work together to make this world a better place for everyone. Let's declare that we will use our past pains to propel us forward to a higher level where no one is denied the opportunity to excel. Let's declare that we will learn to love one another despite our differences, and that we will first start by loving ourselves. Let's declare to keep Dr. King's dream alive by becoming part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Let's declare it to be so, but let us also become doers of our words so that freedom can be sung out of the mouths and ring in the ears of every man, woman, and child of this nation. Let freedom, ready. Thank you.